I'm going to end the poll there, and just to quickly show you the results so you can see about a third of people say they're a little bit confused about some of the content. So it'd be great to post some questions in Padlet, or we'll take some time later on to cover some of those issues. Okay, so this focus groups and interviews are interesting in terms of kind of finding appropriate readings, because there's so much available, because they're kind of the primary methods that we use in data collection methods that we use in qualitative research. So there's a lot of things that you can read about. And most of what you read, I think, is good, decent content and helpful. And so my pick this week from Kitzinger is quite an old article, but I like the way it really emphasizes interaction. And one of my, I guess, goals this week is to really get you to understand and appreciate how much a focus group is not you interviewing 10 people. And so really getting you to see the difference between 10 individual interviews and 10 people in a room, and how what you get from a focus group in terms of that interaction, it's very different kind of data that you get, and you do it for a different kind of reason. So you don't do a focus group because it's quicker and cheaper and easier than running 10 individual interviews, because the nature of the data that you get is really different. And I like the way that Kitzinger really speaks to that. And then there's some optional content. So an example from a project I was involved with, the Growing Up with Cancer project, where we worked with young people in a school, and we used a activity. So we actually got them to make a short drama piece, as if they were like on a current affair or a news program, to make a short drama piece about a young person with cancer. And then we used that activity as a kind of catalyst then for a conversation in a focus group. But what was really nice about that was there's lots of things that we would never, young people would never have said, because they weren't nice things to say about young people with cancer, but they could say it in the context of that activity. And so it allowed us then to kind of engage with some of that content in the focus group discussion afterwards. So that's kind of just an example of a particular way of bringing in activities. And then the other two examples there are really responses to the first couple of years of the pandemic, when face-to-face was off the table. And so what does running a focus group online look like, and kind of the different ways of thinking about it. And then you've got two optional videos. So Richard Kruger is kind of the granddaddy of focus groups. That feels a bit funny to describe him in that way, but he is. He's the person who's written the most and is kind of the go-to in terms of thinking about focus groups. And so there's a nice short video from him. And then Sarah Bernays is talking about her experiences on projects, again, related to the kind of shift that was forced upon us during COVID, about moderating a virtual focus group, that experience. So lots of content there if you're interested in following up and finding out a bit more. So there's two learning activities today. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on the first one, but I think it's worth having a look at an example. So let me just pull up an example. So I'm going to do two things. I'm going to give you where's my chat? Okay, so you're welcome. Oh no, I can't actually do that. So if you have a look on the learning activity page, which I'm going to drop in the chat, if you want to have a look at this directly on your own screen, then you can do, but I'm also going to show you. So this is a data extract. So this is a transcript from my PhD project. So quite a while ago, and it was a project that was about young men, or men's experiences of their sexuality, heterosexual men's experiences of their sexuality. And it was a mixed methods project. And one of the things we did was we got people to run focus groups with their peer group. So this one is from a psychology undergraduate student, and he's interviewing, he's running a focus group with other undergraduate students, so not necessarily in psychology, so they're all undergraduate students. We did another one which was somebody ran a focus group with Army reservists. They were part of the Army Reserve. We had someone else who did one with international students, and we had someone else who ran one with train drivers and train guards. And so really, really different kind of groups, but they kind of all were people who already had some connection, not necessarily really strong connections. Everybody in the group didn't know everybody else necessarily. But the reason I wanted to show you this extract and get you to read through it is to just see what a focus group transcript looks like, because it's not tidy, it's not clean, and depending on the focus group, it's not necessarily easy to kind of pull apart what an individual person thinks about a particular topic. So I'm going to give you a moment to have a read. So either read it directly by downloading it from the learning activity page, or I will scroll through this slowly. Okay, I'm just going to scroll down. Okay, I'll scroll again. Oh. Okay, so what do you notice about this transcript?
It's a bit hard to follow, I thought. Yeah. It's not like sort of listening to a conversation. It's a little bit hard to follow everyone's train of thought. And it sounds like they're all potentially speaking over each other as well, which makes it very difficult.
Yep, you can kind of imagine what it would have looked like, what it would have been like to be in the room. It feels quite raucous and lively, and yep, quite messy.
Really feeding off of each other as well. And there's not a lot of contribution from the moderator.
Yeah, so he takes up a really interesting role. He's kind of sitting back quite a lot and kind of letting it roll, and not being too directive. And the questions he asked, kind of his interruptions, are not kind of small things. Like he only interrupts when he kind of wants to kind of shift the conversation in a direction or kind of clarify something. So it's quite a restrained facilitator. Yep. I think the other point about the way that they're almost finishing each other's ideas. So you can see how it would be very difficult. It wouldn't make a lot of sense to pull out an individual quote from this focus group and say, Ben said blah, 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 because actually what Ben said only makes sense when you see what Sean said and how they kind of, how that interaction has produced a particular thing. It's not just that, well, we wouldn't feel very confident, I think, about saying this is what Ben thinks. Yeah. Okay. Other reflections?
I think also because they're feeding off of each other, must be really hard to come up with a differing unpopular opinion, like the one that Sean had at the end, and then everyone was just talking over him.
Yeah. So Sean's a really interesting participant in this focus group, and what you've identified there is something that happens throughout the whole focus group. So Sean keeps popping up as kind of a contrary position where he's kind of saying, it doesn't work like that for me, or I don't feel comfortable with that, or I don't like that, or that kind of thing. And what's interesting in the focus group is the way you see other people ignoring him, sometimes giving him space, sometimes supporting him, not so much as a yeah, me too, but sometimes supporting him is I hear you. And it's interesting the way that, particularly in the context of particularly this topic, about the way that mostly what's being said is a particular kind of dominant idea of a particular kind of masculinity. And then he kind of keeps chiming in with, oh, I don't know, I don't find it very satisfying. And the way that that gets managed, which is really useful to see. Yeah. Yeah. And that it's taking quite a lot for Sean to do that, I think. And it's hard to imagine how the way that they, that would come out really differently in an individual interview, because the whole interview would be him saying that. And you wouldn't necessarily see that actually that's a difficult position to take. Yep. Some other reflections?
They really feed off each other. So you sort of, you get almost a sense of kind of bravado that, you know, when one of them speaks, another one kind of joins in with the, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. And they sort of feed off each other, which I guess you probably wouldn't get that so much from an interview.
Yep. Yep. And they also make fun of each other, and they challenge each other and take each other to task and say, nah, I wasn't like that, or no, you don't do that, or, you know, so there's a kind of that dynamic that it allows in a focus group that you, as an interviewer, you would never say to somebody, I don't believe you. Whereas in a focus group, there's a little bit more room for people to push each other, hopefully politely still, but to kind of push each other on things, to say, is that really what you think, or is that really what happened? How much do you think of what you can see in this focus group is because they're people who have existing connections?
A lot of it.
Yep. Yep. So there's a real foundation that the focus group kind of shifts up to another level because there's already those dynamics in the group.
Do you think that because this is perhaps a topic that is you know, we're thankfully moving away from some of these attitudes being acceptable, do you think that that camaraderie and sort of paired with the topic disinhibits the responses a little bit, like that they don't feel, oh, I have to be PC, I have to sort of tone down these views because they're well, some of them are really like disgusting, but you know, so that like, oh yeah, no, someone else thinks the same way as me, and this is a safe space, so I can say what I actually really feel. Or conversely, because people are saying those things, is it like a social kind of to fit in with that social group, they're egging that up, you know, they're kind of hamming that up? Yep.
But I think all of it, I think all of those things are at play, because a focus group is always going to be, you're always going to have to pay attention to dynamics, social dynamics, group dynamics, and thinking about, well, who's in the room, and it's not like 6 people you know, it's just 6 random people and any 6 random people. It actually will matter who's in the space and who you've brought together into that space, whether that's they're strangers or not, or that you've got people who have particularly strong perspectives on something. We ran a focus group this morning. Oh, actually, I'm not going to give it as an example. I'll talk about it later. But I think having I think it's one of the things then you have to be really careful about thinking about, well, what is this data? So is this data, this is what people really think, or is there something else going on here? And so thinking about, well, what's the function? Why am I doing a focus group? If what I really want to know is, what do people think about where the bus stop should be? Then that's probably something that there's not going to be a massive amount of group dynamic coming into play, and you probably are going to get a much kind of calmer, neater, turn-taking kind of thing where each person kind of says, this is what I think, and then other people might say, oh yeah, I agree with you, and also, and you won't get the kind of dynamics that you see at play here. But in terms of what I was interested in knowing about, then actually being able to see these dynamics playing out, about how they policed each other, about what they allowed in each other, was actually really useful. It was part of what the project was about. So I think having to kind of pay attention to that, and then thinking about, who do I bring into that focus group? So do I want to bring in people who have really different perspectives? And what will that do to the dynamic? Do I want to, or there might be some topics that actually that would be really uncomfortable for everybody, and so having people who have more similar kinds of perspectives would be a more comfortable experience for someone. But it might be that some things then that don't get talked about. And I think that's partly why in the Growing Up with Cancer project, that idea of allowing them to talk about unacceptable things in a dramatization kind of allowed stuff. It meant we could then talk about those ideas and they weren't coming from us. So kind of thinking about the different kinds of ways of bringing that into a focus group, I think, is really interesting.
Julie, just a quick question, not to do with the interpretation, but did you facilitate this?
No.
Or no? So it was a male facilitator, I'm assuming?
This one was, yeah.
Yeah, no, just because if it was female, they probably wouldn't have said all this. So
a bit, it's interesting. So I knew that I wasn't the right person to facilitate these focus groups. And so these were psychology students, they were honors students, or grad dip students, can't remember. And so we asked them to bring together a group from within their network that had something in common. And so they were of the group. So I think that helped, but they weren't all men. So the train guards was a woman who did that one, and the Army Reservists was also run by a woman. And actually there's some age differences that probably account for some stuff. So the Army Reservists, it wasn't quite it wasn't quite that picking someone up in a bar type stuff that they were talking about, but actually a lot of the same kinds of ideas. And much more of Sean's perspective comes up in some of the older men's groups around how the idea of what masculinity should be like is really constraining and dissatisfying for them. And so it was interesting to kind of be able to see the way that played out differently. So I think both who the facilitator is, I think it really does make a difference. Yeah. And then who else is in the room. Whereas in this focus group, all of these, they were all undergraduate students. None of them were in serious relationships. The Army Reservists, there was a lot of men with families or divorced men who are kind of reflecting on relationship breakups and stuff. So it's really different kinds of interactions.
Thank you.
Okay, so I might move us along to think about running our own focus group. So I'm going to go back to our PowerPoint. Okay, so we've got a decent number of people here that I think we can get everybody into a focus group, which is really nice. We've got some volunteers who are going to help us out with that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up 2 breakout rooms. I'm going to put facilitators and note takers, and then I'm just going to randomly assign everybody else into one of those rooms. Unless, so let me give a get out. So we need the participants to do their job as participants. So you have to imagine that you've decided to volunteer for this focus group. So we need you to be an engaged participant. So that means turning your camera on, engaging with the questions. If that's not going to work for you, then I need you to come out of the group and let me know so that we kind of know what's going on. The two facilitators and the note takers have a set of questions and a script that they're going to go through as if they were, well, no, I was going to say as if you're real moderators, but you were being facilitators, so you are. I reckon kind of 15, 20 minutes, see how you go. Part of what I really want people to do in this exercise is both engage in it as if it was real. So, think about the questions you're being asked and respond to them reasonably, but also kind of think about noticing what kind of interaction is happening. So how easy or how difficult is it to get people interacting? How much of what's happening is a kind of answering the question that's being posed, or does a kind of conversation start to happen between the participants? That's you guys, and what helps that to happen, and also a little bit of reflecting on just the particular challenges of doing this on Zoom and how that kind of works and how it gets managed. So we'll have some time afterwards to kind of reflect on some of those things and to think about them. Questions before I set you all off?
Just a quick one, Julie. Sorry, I'm a moderator and I'm busting for the bathroom.
Go.
Once you put us into a breakout room, I'll then be like, I'll run. I'll be
no, go now, because it's going to take me it'll take me a minute to set up the rooms.
Thank you.
Anyone else that's busting, now's your time. Okay, I think we've got everybody back. So I'd like to invite the two facilitators and the two note takers to lead off some reflections for us and tell us about what that experience was like. What was easy, what was hard? Sharon, do you want to start first?
Yeah, I think that was nerve-wracking. It was, I had a really nice group and everyone was very interested in, kind of giving their responses. And I think that made it easier for me. But I think the challenge with Zoom is that I can't direct my gaze or redirect my gaze to anyone in particular. So if I wanted to ask someone a question, I had to actually pick out their name and ask them if they wanted to add to the discussion. And also because it's Zoom, everyone's cautious about speaking over the other person. So I think that we weren't as unruly as the example, the transcript that we read earlier, for sure. Yeah, and other than that, I think we did get a lot of valuable inputs from students regarding the topic at hand. And I think that was, I don't know if I would have gotten that much out of it if it was face-to-face. I wonder if that's a plus of this being online. Just being able to get very clear responses from people because they're speaking uninterrupted. Yeah, that was my feedback, basically.
Yep. Awesome. Nicolette?
Yeah, look, for me, had a lovely group. One of the challenges that I felt as the moderator is that because, very lovely, polite, we're on Zoom, I did feel that my involvement was more active than it could have been, perhaps. So if we were face-to-face, I probably still would try to engage people by using their names, not just using gaze. But I still felt it was almost a roll call. And it was, I was like, okay, what about you? What about you? And I certainly think that ideally I would have been, stepping off and getting more of that bouncing kind of detail. I guess one of the advantages of Zoom, even though we're all online anyway and we're all participating in this as a tutorial exercise, is that we might be able to, I guess, access people that we wouldn't normally be able to get access to. So there certainly are some advantages, but and the things that people came up with were great. We didn't really have any contrary opinions. It was all very much, yes, there was a little bit of variety, but no one disagreed.
Yeah, in the groups that we ran this morning, it was probably similar. They both kind of talked about in the groups, it was a lot of it was very agreeable, that the kind of like everyone was in a similar page. But one of the groups, the kind of agreeableness was quite low key, and in the other group, some people had really horrendously stressful online experiences, particularly related to exams, and so there was a lot of emotion in the group discussion. So even though everybody was agreeing, it still felt like it was much livelier, and I could even see it just in kind of noticing the body language between the two groups. Even though everybody was really agreeing, there was more outrage in one of the groups than there was in the other ones. And it's interesting, the one when we talked about what would have helped with some of the interaction, the first thing people said was name tags. And of course, that's one of the beauties of Zoom. We've kind of got everybody's names. It's really easy to have that. And so it was interesting that was something people, I guess we've all kind of gotten used to it. And so we've kind of forgotten how to find out people's names. And in the groups, they didn't kind of go through a who are you kind of thing so easily. Catherine, some reflections from what was it like?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I think one of the benefits of Zoom is that everyone, I mean, there were very good points that were made. That's flexibility. You get to meet people from all over the world, and so there's some benefits. I think, yeah, absolutely. The challenge is the dynamic you want from a focus group is more the interaction between participants. And I think with Zoom, with not being able to see body language aside from sort of neck up, it's hard to sort of take cues from people about when they're going to speak. So just observing what people were doing, they were sort of nodding in agreement, but that was pretty much all that we could see in terms of, whereas I think if you were more face-to-face, they would be like, oh yeah, I agree. They might have been a bit more vocal about it, where I think the fear of speaking over someone on Zoom sort of held people back a little bit. So their agreement was a bit more muted.
Yep, that's interesting. The other thing we noted, we talked about a bit in this morning, was about when people kind of the difference between the leaning back and leaning in, and about how that kind of signaled, I've got something to say now. I'm getting my whole body ready to say something, and that's much harder to pick up on in Zoom.
Yeah,
I think here I'm sorry for interrupting, Catherine.
No,
I think
right.
over here it's a little bit more of being a face reader on and a lot more than it would have been in a face-to-face situation, because even like a twitch of the eyebrow, oh, does the person want to say something next? Should I call upon that person next? So that's a lot of pressure.
Yep.
I think maybe an improvement, if that we could have had as one of the ground rules, is everybody mute off, because that removes that barrier of, oh, I've got to unmute myself to get in. Totally understand, practicalities, and there are some limitations, particularly if there's noisiness going on or people coming in and interrupting you, so sorry about that, guys. But that there is that barrier of, okay, well, I've got to unmute myself before I can contribute, and then you kind of lose your timing.
Yeah. And I guess a little bit of that is maybe then spending a bit of time at the beginning talking about really acknowledging that up front and saying this. So the stuff that's a bit more difficult because we're doing this on Zoom is the following. And so this is how I suggest we do it. And you kind of set you need to be in a quiet space. I'm going to ask everybody to unmute. How I might call on people a bit more than I would do if we were in a room together, so kind of like setting some of that stuff up with people, and also kind of saying, well, what are the other kinds of ways could you use the reaction buttons on Zoom so that you kind of get a bit of, so has anyone had a similar experience, thumbs up, who'd like to contribute to that, so that you kind of both use what Zoom actually does offer, as well as trying to overcome some of the things that maybe you lose a bit.
Hi, it's Catherine, the other Catherine. I absolutely agree with everything I've heard so far. I mean, it as a kind of an observer to it, it did feel much more like a Q&A session rather than a, I don't know, interactive conversation. And again, all the points about Zoom and the issues of that I think are valid. Also, I think it really compares to the one you showed before, where everybody knew each other on that transcript, whereas in this one, we're all still relative strangers. I think most of us, and I think that that came out a bit, that we didn't have that level of comfort with each other, so that you didn't get that same familiarity and interaction. So I think it was quite stark compared to that transcript you showed earlier.
So what kind of strategies do you think you could use to kind of break down some of those very understandable kind of barriers quickly, or even create kind of bonds and connections so that people do feel a bit kind of, because in some ways, if you'd run this for an hour, at some point over the course of that hour, you would have felt that shift where people kind of relaxed into it. And I wonder what kind of things do you think you could do that would kind of speed that up, particularly in the Zoom?
I do wonder, I mean, we did that icebreaker at the beginning. I kind of wonder if it's, the luxury of hindsight, is it worth spending more time on icebreaker to get that sort of interaction later, rather than seeing it as something we've kind of got to get through quickly? Is it worth sort of really kind of spending a bit more time there and perhaps doing a couple of rounds of it so we get a different level of comfort?
Yep. So if you're recruiting for a focus group, for example, from a setting where people do know each other, maybe an icebreaker that could be useful is who in the room knows each other, or does anyone here know each other? How do you tell us about how you know each other? Or like pointing out that actually, oh yeah, these people do know each other. Oh yeah, I have a class with you, or I sat next to you the other day at the library, or I don't know whether that could be something that's useful.
Yep.
The icebreaker. I mean, I participated in an expert consensus focus group, which was facilitated by a professional qual moderator a few weeks ago, and we did exactly that. We said what our name was, where we were from, because we're all from all over Australia, and what we do outside work, and that kind of worked really well. And we also had lunch breaks and things like that, and we're able to kind of chat and be like, oh, you're from Royal Melbourne, like Royal Melbourne Hospital, or nice to put a face to the name, or something like that. Harder to replicate on Zoom. I don't know what the equivalent would be.
I wonder if we could have a pre-icebreaker. So somewhere where, a session where the candidates who are there in the discussion can speak to each other unhampered by the facilitator and note taker. So before me and Catherine could have gone in, if the rest of the people were in the breakout room just chatting with each other very informally, a very casual conversation, and then we come in, because the minute we're starting off with our questions, the environment suddenly becomes really formal, and that camaraderie is just out the window.
Yeah.
So
Oh, sorry, I was just going to quickly say that's funny, because when we go into breakout rooms, when you're waiting for people to join and stuff, we actually kind of do that. And that's how, as much as we've had fairly limited time, like how I've kind of, gotten to know Samira and Catherine. Apparently Catherine and I like to be twins every week, and I've mistaken myself for her in video. So like that actually could be a really good way to do that.
Yeah, that they're excellent points. I think something
Humor.
else.
Sorry. I think you raised a good point. I think humor is a really good one to bring into things. And you know, that lack of familiarity, I think, also made it harder to bring humor in, but it really does help kind of break the ice. It also kind of helps get conversations going a bit sometimes as well.
Yep, absolutely. And so I think some of the kinds of things that you could think about doing would be give people an activity. And it might be an activity that is entirely low stakes and has no data value, but that might just kind of give people a problem to solve, or some kind of something that requires them to interact, not necessarily as a whole group, but maybe as in small, kind of like the person who would be sitting next to them if you're in a room. And so that's something that it might be a silly problem, to go to your point, Catherine, about humor, that kind of allows people just to kind of be silly together. Or there's so many online things that you can do that could be you know, solving a word puzzle, or making a virtual Lego character, or whatever. It doesn't matter in some ways. Or that you actually get the group to do a ranking activity or a brainstorming activity where everybody's kind of contributing, and someone has to be the person who, well, I'll take notes. Or you could use Google Docs to do a live thing where people are talking while simultaneously moving things around. And so I think that kind of point about, in some ways, removing the facilitator out early so that people have those opportunities to be more interactive. And then the facilitator kind of being able to do a more facilitator role rather than a kind of an interviewer role is. And that's going to depend a bit on what the topic is and who the people are. So if you've got a bunch of clinicians, they're not going to want to do Lego or whatever the thing, you know, they're going to be about, let's get down to business, please. So kind of is kind of like, I was telling the tutorial this morning that I went to a focus group, and it was in a health service, and the health service had bought lunch, i.e. loaves of bread and a block of cheese and some tomato and some lettuce. And so as a group, we had to make sandwiches. And I was really irritated initially. And then I realized what a valuable opportunity this was, because in the half an hour it took us to kind of decide who was going to slice the cheese and who wanted tomato and all that kind of stuff, just that kind of conversation and that breaking down of those barriers. And so that by the time we actually got in the room, people were kind of chit-chatting and worked out who knew people from what place and all of that kind of stuff. So I think having that space is great.
One thing that just came to mind as well, specific to Zoom, is like an icebreaker would be breakout room speed dating. 30 seconds, rotate through, so that you have to, you know, interact with each person individually.
Yep. What about the participants? Would somebody like to share their experiences or their observations? You were in a particular privileged position to kind of observe how things were going.
Hi. Yeah, it was a great experience, and Nicole was really a very good facilitator, and she asked really good questions. Yeah, I would like to add on that icebreaker thing that, yeah, I think on Zoom we don't know each other that much. So I mean, asking more about each other and sort of making, you know, comfortable with each other, or spending a bit more time on that, make us more comfortable, and you know. So yeah, I think that would really be good in this. Yeah.
Yep.
Overall, it was a good experience. Yeah.
Yep. One more reflection before we move on.
I think it's really good because the moderator Nicole, she trying to make everyone involved in our group discussions, and also before starting the formal group discussion, she said that this is that your answers are okay to answer, and then make everyone comfortable to answer, because like she said, there's no right and wrong answers. And then also she informed that this will be, for example, this will be recorded, and if you don't want to be participate in the recording, you can change your name. So she really gave us a lot of options and respect, that is really good. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Rose. And it's a good reminder, actually, to me, that a lot of the conversation we've had in this reflection has been about the kind of peculiarities of Zoom and the particular challenges of doing it on Zoom. But actually, what you've just reminded us of is kind of the value of, regardless of whether it's in person or on Zoom, the kind of work that you do as a facilitator to anticipate what things people might be worrying about and to reassure them about those things, and to make sure that people feel that this is a good space to be in, and to think about what's going to happen with their data. And also issues around confidentiality in a focus group are really challenging, because we don't have a way to control the 10 participants in the group. And so, I can sign a confidentiality agreement, or you can sign a consent form as a participant, but actually there's no way to guarantee that you won't retell what you hear in the focus group. So kind of thinking about the way that gets managed in terms of an agreement with everybody that says, look, this is the kind of content we're going to talk about, so let's come up with some ground rules that makes everybody feel comfortable, and that's regardless of whether it's online or in person. Okay, I'm gonna move us on. I'm conscious of time, so it's worth saying, just flick back there, that there's 2 recordings in the learning activity in the module, which are in-person focus groups that happened maybe 5 or 6 years ago, where students allowed me to record them. So it's a slightly different topic. I can't even remember what the topic is now. But it might be good just to kind of watch one of those to kind of see, to notice then what are the kind of the common challenges around doing a focus group, regardless of whether it's online or in person. And so there's an opportunity to have a look at that if you want to. Okay, questions. I didn't see any questions on the Padlet. I'm just going to have a quick check. I'm going to just leave a bit of a gap here if somebody has a question that they would like to ask. I have not been inundated by questions about the interview assessment, either in person or by email or on the discussion board. So I'm assuming that means that people haven't done their interview yet, and so they haven't run into any problems. So please feel free to use the discussion board. I'm dropping into it regularly, and if I do get email questions, I will put the answers on the discussion board. But hopefully the material that we've provided gives you everything that you would need. Usually if I haven't answered a question on the discussion board or the FAQ, it's because the answer is, I don't mind. So next week, we have our last week on data collection, and we will be talking about visual data collection methods. So that will be my colleague Justin from School of Health Sciences has recorded the lecture content for that. And so he has asked for the tutorials next week. He's setting an activity that requires you to create or find a drawing, 2 drawings, pictures, maybe a meme that you've already got saved on your phone or something that you find on the internet, which speaks to or reflects your experience of COVID and the pandemic. So it can be something that just speaks generally to it or very specifically. The image might be a very personal image, or it might be quite a general image. It's up to you. You might want to create something. If you want to do a drawing, that's perfectly great. We will ask you to share that with one other person. So we will pair you off next week, and we'll get you to look at each other's images and just write some notes about what you think the image is about, why the person's chose it, what does it represent, and then we'll get you to do a brief interview where you talk to them about that image and why they've chosen it and what's going on for them. So that's what that activity will involve. So you need to do a bit of prep just to bring those 2 of those images along. I'll send out an email later on this afternoon with a reminder about that. Last thing, reminder to do your quiz. This is the participation activity access code for this week. Time for questions.
Just confirming, Julie, that we just need to do the focus group participation activity. Yeah.
You do. So the idea was this week that we really wanted to cover both of these data collection activities, and we didn't want to make a choice about which one you should focus on. So you get to do the choosing. I know some people are doing both. There's one participation activity for both that just says which thing did you focus on and what do you want to think about. The quiz, there's 2 quizzes. If you do both quizzes, Canvas will just save the one that you got the most marks on. So if people do both, it's fine.
What about if we don't do both and only do the observation for the quiz and then the participation for the focus? Is that okay? Still okay?
I will never know. if you do the participation activity about the focus group and you do the quiz about the observation, I will never know. I won't go looking for it. I won't know. So I'm easy.
Okay.
And if you want, and in fact, so if you want to do, so one of the nice things about choosing the focus group for the tutorial is that actually the observation is something that you can do on your own. So if you want to go and have a look at that learning activity, there's a clip there that you can watch yourself and do that guided observation activity on your own. So if you want to do both, you can.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Hopefully Emily will be back with you next week. Nice to see you all. Nice to kind of drop in actually to a different group and to come back online. Good luck for the rest of your week. And yeah, okay. Thanks everyone.
Thank you so much, Julie. It was fun.
Thanks, Julie.
Thank you. Thank you for our volunteers.
Thanks.